Hello again. I'm Nick Leifker and welcome to Management 409 Operations Management. We talked about the introduction, we talked about why we take operations, and there were a number of tools that were identified that could improve a company's operations, could improve how that company does business. One of the most important is forecasting, and the reason why is because we make decisions that affect the future and that are affected by the future. As such, we need at least some rough picture as to what the future holds, and that is what forecasting provides. So, what we're going to look at is several things. We're going to look at what makes a good forecast. What are the characteristics of a good forecast? We're going to look at various forecasting methods, several types of what we call simple forecasting techniques, and we'll talk about why these are considered simple. And now we're going to talk about more complex forecasting methods such as regression-based techniques. And then we're going to finish the chapter off by talking about forecast accuracy. How do we measure forecast accuracy? And what tools do we use for a given situation when it comes to measuring forecast accuracy? So, why is forecasting important? Well, this is not something I recommend. In fact, do not try this at home or anywhere else for that matter. Don't try to drive blindfolded. What'll happen if you do? You're likely to wreck, right? Well, going through business without forecasting what the future holds is much the same way. If you have no idea as to what the future holds, you are making decisions in an environment where you don't know what's going on. Forecasting provides a picture as to what the future holds, what the future is going to be. Because we have to make decisions. We have problems to solve. So, how do we solve those problems? How do we get things done? So, we make decisions. We have to make decisions that have some bearing on the future. So, in order to understand what that future holds, we need some method of forecasting. We need some way to see what is going to happen. So, why is forecasting important? It provides some estimate of the future. It provides some picture of what the future holds. So it provides an estimate of future values, and more importantly, it facilitates problem solving. Before you can make decisions with regard to your business, before you can solve problems for your business, you need some idea as to what the situation is, where things stand. So you take data and you provide meaning for it. You provide some context for that data, which you then use to make decisions, which you then use to solve problems. So forecasting allows us to plan for future events. Now, there's a couple of rules with regard to forecasting that I want you to remember. Here's the first. Forecasts, what we do is we take data we have now. So current data, past data, and use it to get some picture of what the future holds. Well, that means that we make an assumption there. An assumption that those past events, those current events, that they are a reflection of what is going to happen. So, forecasts are only as accurate as the degree to which those past events and current events model future events. So, what does this mean? Well, good way of thinking about it. Suppose we're rooting for a particular sports team, and that sports team is doing well. It's having a great season. And then all of a sudden, a star player breaks their leg. Suddenly, every picture we had, every forecast we had as to what that team's future held is gone. It's changed. In other words, what was the past is not reflected in the future. These things happen. So, first rule of forecasting: forecasts are only as accurate as the degree to which the past and the present is a reflection of what's going to happen in the future. So, what makes a good forecast? Well, there's a number of qualities that make a good forecast, and it's a good idea to look at each of them. There are some commonalities to them, but it's a good idea to look at them. First, they need to be timely. In other words, the forecast needs to be completed, disseminated to the people who need to make decisions in such a way that those people can make decisions about the future and affect the future. If it's too late to do that, well, it's not a good forecast. Well, it needs to be accurate and reliable. We need to have some idea that our forecast is somewhat close to what we expect the future to be. So we expect it to be accurate. Also, again, we do expect it to be reliable. It's not a good case where 9/10 of the time it's okay, but 1/10 of the time it's so far out of scale as to render it useless. Now, the next three: meaningful units, in writing, and simple to understand. All of these three get to the heart of the matter. And to understand this, a little bit of wisdom from a friend of mine. Knowledge is power. Language is torque. In other words, knowledge, this powers what we do. This powers the decisions we make. However, it isn't any good if we're not able to communicate it. We may have all the wisdom in the world, but if we can't communicate that wisdom, it's worse than useless. So, we have wisdom to communicate. So, our forecast needs to be in meaningful units. So, suppose we decide to forecast the sales for our company for the next year in German Deutschmarks. Now, keep in mind, the German Deutschmark hasn't existed for over 20 years, but, well, that's the way it goes sometimes. So, how useful is the forecast then, if it's in a currency that hasn't been used in many, many years? Well, it's not useful. To that end, it needs to be in writing, correct? It needs to be in such a format that we're able to communicate it. So we need to write it down. That way we're able to disseminate the results of our forecast and get them out to the people who need them. And to that end, it also needs to be easy to understand. And we will see this characteristic when it comes to multiple linear regression. We can use results from multiple linear regression forecasts to get some idea as to how the variables in this forecast affect events. So if we have a forecast that is so complicated and so convoluted that no one can use it effectively, what's the point? And then we get to this last one. That needs to be affordable. So how to describe this? Just suppose, I came up with some computer that could predict the stock market with 100% accuracy. Sounds good, doesn't it? Sounds extremely valuable, doesn't it? Now, what if I then said, this computer will only cost you $10 trillion. How useful is it now? That's the one other thing about a good forecast. It needs to be affordable to the point where it actually generates value. It actually saves us money. So, these are the characteristics of a good forecast. Now, there are certain steps in a forecasting process, and that said, you'll note that with these steps, I write down questions in the middle of them, and there's a reason why. These questions are your typical problem-solving framework. And that's what a forecast is. It is a problem to solve. What does the future hold? That's a problem. So we start any problem solving with the question, what do we want? We need to define what we are looking for. So any problem solving starts with those 4 words. What do we want? So in this case, what's the purpose of our forecast? What do we intend to accomplish with it? And also we need to know what's the time horizon. Is it going to be forecasting for next week? Is it going to be forecasting for next month? Is it going to be forecasting for 50 years from now? The time horizon is important because the further out we get with the forecast, the less accurate we're likely to be. And also, that aspect of the time horizon, that can limit what methods we have available to forecast. Because as we'll see, some forecasting methods are only short term. So, once we've defined what we want, the next step to any problem solving, where are we now? So we look at the current situation. So we may have to obtain data. We need to gather the data. We need to gather what we intend to use to make this forecast. Then, well, maybe we have to clean up the data. Sometimes we have to throw out the garbage that's in the data. Sometimes data has garbage. Case in point, as I mentioned before, I was an analyst in the retail energy industry. Well, the retail energy industry, you get the data on customers' energy usage. And that said, well, that data isn't necessarily clean. Cases in point. What happens if there's a blackout? If there's a blackout, energy usage is 0, right? Because there's no energy coming in. But, well, is that a reflection of future events? Is that a reflection of what is actually going to happen? Well, probably not. Also, well, sometimes one of the most difficult aspects to dealing with energy usage is taking daylight savings time into account. And I know that may sound strange, but consider this for a moment. Some purposes to using energy are dependent on what we call the circadian time rhythm. In other words, the sun is up, temperatures rise, sun goes down, temperatures fall. That's going to have an effect on energy usage. However, there is also the standard business day, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And some energy usage is also going to be determined by that. So how do you separate the energy generated from the typical circadian time rhythm with the energy that comes from your typical business day? That's one of the tricky aspects that we had to deal with when it came to cleaning up the data for a forecast. And then we start analyzing the forecast. We start seeing if there's any patterns, any things that we can take advantage of, use in our forecast. So, once we know what we want, and once we have an idea as to where we stand, well, then we need to figure out how to get from where we are, from the current data we have, to where we want to be, to our goal of an effective, proper forecast. So, once we've looked at the data, we've cleaned the data, we've analyzed the data, we select a forecasting technique. The forecasting technique we select has to match the purpose of the forecast, has to match the time horizon. Remember, some forecasting methods are only short-term forecasting methods. So we have to select a forecasting technique that matches what we want and also matches what we can use with the data we have. So once we figured out how to get from where we are to where we want to be, we act. We make the decision. We get things done. So we make the forecast. We develop the forecasting technique. We get results. That said, there is one more thing we need to do. We need to see how well we did. We need to analyze. We need to evaluate our results. So, last step in any problem solving is to evaluate results, to see how well we did. And in this case, that means monitoring the forecast. It means measuring the forecast error. So, remember, forecasting is just another form of problem solving. It's just that the steps are tailored a little bit for the situation. Remember, any problem solving, first you define what you want, then you figure out where you are now, and then you figure out how you get from where you are to where you want to be. You make the decision, and then you evaluate how well you did.